Kieran Mulvaney, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much for asking me on. I'm happy to be here.
Kieran Mulvaney is an author and journalist. He has written several books, including The Whaling Season, an inside account of the struggle to stop commercial whaling, and The Great White Bear, a natural and unnatural history of the polar bear. In addition to being an environmentalist, he covers the sport of boxing. Make sure to catch Kieran Mulvaney's weekly show, Heavy Hitting Boxing Podcast, at ESPN. Kieran, you were at the big fight at the MGM Grand, Floyd Mayweather versus Canelo Alvarez. Your thoughts on the fight?
It was, once again, another Floyd Mayweather masterclass, wasn't it? The only difference, I think, for me this time then from some of his other recent fights is that of late he's normally been pretty content to give up 2 or 3 rounds while he checks his opponent out and then turns it on. This time he came out firing with that jab right from the very beginning, and contrary to what, at least one judge thought, I thought it was essentially a whitewash. It was a tremendous atmosphere, tremendous event, and it resulted in a very one-sided beating.
Well, I had the fight 116-112. A lot of people probably disagree with that card.
I had it 119-109. I thought that Floyd, there were certainly a couple of rounds I could see toward the end that Floyd basically took off. That I could see, if he wanted to give Alvarez those rounds. There was, I think the 8th round was fairly close. That was a pretty exciting round. I think a fair few people gave Alvarez that one. And maybe 1 or 2 of the very early rounds before Floyd turned it on. But, basically, I mean, there was clearly no doubt that Floyd won. And to have a 114-114 score that one judge had was absolutely baffling.
But that seems to have overshadowed the fight somewhat.
I think probably because the fight was so lacking in drama in itself. That's the only real drama to come out of Saturday night, really. It was, I think by about round 6 or so, it's fairly obvious that Floyd was doing one of his painting by numbers routines. Certainly the sense in the arena was that it was such a dominant performance that is, like you said, the only sort of drama that's come out.
See, that's interesting. At home, for me, there was a sense of competition all the way through. Perhaps the championship rounds, no doubt those were Mayweather rounds, although C.J. Ross disagrees. But the mood in the audience, how was that?
It began as an extraordinarily pro-Alvarez crowd, completely drowning out any Floyd chants. It was a pro-Alvarez crowd all week. But you can always, here's the thing, if you're ever ringside, right, and say, for example, you're distracted, you're taking a note, or you just happen to turn away just at the moment where a punch lands, you can always tell who's landed the punch by the nature of the response from the crowd, especially if it's a very biased crowd. And if it's a yay, then you know that their guy Alvarez landed the punch. And if it's a ooh, then you know that Mayweather landed the punch. There were a lot of oohs and not a lot of yays. And there were a lot of Canelo chants through the first several rounds and lots of si se puede chants in the opening rounds. And they gradually diminished and were supplanted by USA, USA and TMT, TMT chants. And by the end, they attempted to sort of raise the spirits of their fighter, but it was more of an acknowledgement, I think, of what they were seeing and the genius of what they were seeing. And clearly there was no sense. There was a huge roar of disbelief in the arena when it was announced that it was a majority decision, because I don't think there was any doubt, even amongst the most rabid Canelo fans, that Floyd had clearly won this fight.
Yet there was respect, certainly a lot of pre-fight respect for Canelo Alvarez, getting some of the best betting lines you could ever find for Floyd Mayweather. It was 2.5 to 1. Was it, in fact, 2.5 to 1?
Look, I mean, I think the sense was that this is a young guy, also undefeated. He's the bigger guy, a skilled guy who potentially had anyone were going. I think it was more a sense of not necessarily that, wow, Alvarez is going to beat Floyd Mayweather, he's got a really good chance, more that of the potential remaining opponents, this is the one person who might conceivably upset the apple cart. And as you know, of course, Vegas lines don't necessarily reflect who's most likely to win. It's a case of, well, we'll set the line in such a way that we can get the most money. And there was a lot of money on Alvarez because of the huge Mexican support. There was respect for Alvarez beforehand, even though the vast majority of media picked Floyd to win, and to win by a unanimous decision. And there was a lot of respect afterwards. Floyd was very respectful and very generous toward Alvarez at the post-fight press conference, said, look, this is a young guy, he's going to go in the Hall of Fame. He's going to be a great fighter. He's just 23 years old, and he came up against a guy with a lot more experience. I mean, he also came up against a guy who's vastly better, of course. Yeah, there was respect all around. And what was interesting for me was that Alvarez, whereas a lot of Floyd opponents, you can sense when they say in the build-up, oh, I'm going to beat him, I'm going to be the first guy to defeat him, you sense that they're just trying to convince themselves of that. Alvarez believed it, I think. He was an extremely calmly confident young man in all his meetings with us. And yet, despite that, he still, for large sections of the fight, was barely able to lay a glove on him. And I think that's a testament to how dominant Floyd Mayweather is among his peers right now.
I've actually heard that Canelo is a bit chilly to the press. And in fact, I was a bit surprised to see him show a bit of poor sportsmanship in the fight, not touching gloves with Mayweather, round 4 or something.
Yeah, he's been a bit rough. There was a touch of the Victor Ortiz's about him a couple of times actually in that fight, and I think that was just born out of frustration, really, and you can see it, and it annoyed Floyd, and that's just not a smart thing to do, really. To be honest with you, you don't want to get him riled up in the ring. The interactions that I've had with him, he's cool. I think not hostile in any way. It's just that he's one of these guys who has a supreme self-confidence, and I think one manifestation of that is, for example, his fight with Austin Trout was supposed to be the co-main event of the Floyd Mayweather against Robert Guerrero fight, and he said, unless Floyd promises me, signs an agreement that he fights me next, I'm not going to be on that card. I'm not going to be his co-main. And at 23 years old, to be able to stand up to the number one star in the sport the way that he did, I think shows what an extraordinarily preternaturally self-confident young man he is. And that came across. I think he's calm and he's quiet. There's a touch of the Miguel Cotto's about him, you know. I've always really enjoyed dealing with Miguel Cotto personally, but he's not someone who'll go out of his way to be huggy and friendly and warm and fuzzy. He just is who he is, and I think Canelo has that similar calm, detached self-confidence. Although I've never seen, you know, Cotto melt down and elbow and do the kind of stuff that Alvarez has did in the ring.
He's also a much older guy, so.
Of course, yes.
After the Miguel Cotto fight, a lot of people were saying we're starting to see the diminishment of Floyd Mayweather's skills. Mm-hmm. Now he's back with Floyd Mayweather Sr., and all of a sudden, the fountain of youth. So is Floyd Mayweather better under Roger or Floyd Mayweather Sr.?
Honestly, I think you or I could get in the corner with Floyd Mayweather and produce a work of art. Floyd Mayweather Jr. trains Floyd Mayweather Jr. It's just a question of who he feels more comfortable with at that time. I was actually talking with a couple of good friends of mine on the Money team and asking that very same thing and saying, you know, I have a feeling I could train Floyd. And they said, yeah, look, you could. We all could. He trains himself. He runs his training camp. When Roger was training him, you know, Roger was essentially, you know, sitting on the floor of the gym watching Floyd do his stuff. What he would do was hold the mitts. I think that when his relationship with his father is on, he trusts him a great deal to be able to say, Floyd, this is what I'm seeing in you, and this is what you need to do. So I think he trusts him, and I think that's the big difference.
Now, he obviously won this fight. Good chance he'll go out undefeated. But what if he loses? What happens to the Mayweather brand? Because if he is a brand, and it's not, he's just not an ordinary boxer. If you defeat Mayweather, you've defeated Nike or Adidas. Yes. You've defeated a brand, right? So what happens if he loses?
Well, that's right, exactly. And he's built that brand on being undefeated. Everything else comes out of the insert number here. At the moment, it's 45 have tried, 45 have failed. I mean, absolutely. I think within the sport, were he to lose, he says he has 2 years and 4 fights remaining. Were he to lose, particularly if he were to lose in, say, 2015, it would make absolutely no difference to his legacy because everybody loses, right? Sugar Ray Robinson lost. Sugar Ray Leonard lost. Marvin Hagler lost. Muhammad Ali lost. So I think within boxing, it makes no difference to his legacy. How it might affect his brand among the casual fans and those who, you know, just tune in and just not so much boxing fans as they are Floyd Mayweather fans, I don't know. Of course, it would also depend on how he were to lose and to whom. If somehow Manny Pacquiao resurrects his career and somehow comes back and they have that fight and after all of this, Pacquiao beats him, then I think that would be horrible for Floyd's brand, because then you'd think, wow, maybe for all these 6 years or so, he really was avoiding him because he knew he would be beaten by him. I don't think that would happen at all. And I agree with you that I think the strong likelihood is, given the availability of possible opponents, that he is going to make it to the finish line undefeated, unless he suddenly gets very old. But I also think he's smart enough to know that if he suddenly gets very old, he would probably stop before that happened.
Well, what's the worst way that he could lose? It seems like an easy answer, KO, right? But
KO
what if
by Manny Pacquiao, I think, would be the absolute worst thing.
That would be humiliating. But what if someone goes out there and actually outboxes him?
Well, here's the interesting thing, right? Because for so long, there's been this sense of, okay, what's the blueprint? How do you beat Floyd Mayweather? And most people have based it off the guy who arguably came closest to beating him, Jose Luis Castillo, which is some 10 years or so ago now, which was jab him to the body, bully him to the ropes, work him over under the ropes, smother him, do all of that. Oscar De La Hoya tried that. Robert Guerrero said he was going to try and do that. That was why people thought Canelo Alvarez would have a good shot. So now it's like, well, okay, maybe apparently that doesn't work, or at least it doesn't work among the people who have had the opportunity to do it. So maybe then, what about someone who's almost as fast as him, who might not have the complete suite of skills? And so now people are talking, okay, and I've thought about it for a while, that maybe an Amir Khan or a Devon Alexander might be the kind of person to provide him with a puzzle that he hasn't had to deal with before, for all their own failings. And I think you're onto something. If, say, Devon Alexander beats Amir Khan and Floyd and Devon fight, and Devon were to somehow provide enough of a technical challenge, enough of a speed challenge, that he outpointed Floyd in a boring fight, that would be awful, because Devon Alexander has absolutely no fan base and he's lost and nobody really thinks much of him in boxing. So I think to be outboxed by a guy who is not held in as super high regard would be very damaging.
Well, let's look at some of the possible opponents for Mayweather. I'm just going to throw some names out there. Give me your 2 cents worth. Although I think it's worth more than that. Carlos Molina.
I mean, I guess it's a possibility. I'm not sure that either he or Ishe is going to be allowed anywhere near TV for a long time after that fight.
You mentioned Ishe, and I know that you wrote an article about him, and on your heavy-hitting podcast, you were suggesting that becoming a champion would make him better. But I saw the absolute opposite of that.
As did I.
He was more interested in that stupid snakeskin robe that he was wearing and trying to pull off some pseudo Mayweather shoulder defense.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't good. It was the first time that the arena was already pretty full, and yet by the end of that fight was completely devoid of energy. It wasn't even that the crowd was so annoyed by the poor fight that it was booing or hissing or whistling. It wasn't doing that. It was just flat. It was completely uninterested. It sucked the air out of a room of 15,000 people, and that's really hard to do. But they managed to do it. So, Carlos Molina, he brings, I think, people within boxing know what a good and dangerous fighter he is, but he brings nothing to it in terms of a fan base, nothing to it in terms of money, a little bit of danger, and no TV executive is going to want to put a big Showtime pay-per-view on the back of Carlos Molina possibly providing an intriguing fight. They're just not going to be able to sell that, so that doesn't happen.
Austin Trout.
Austin's got to reestablish himself also, hasn't fought since his loss to Canelo. He's going to be a difficult sell in the near term because he just lost to a guy who got completely bamboozled by Floyd. I like Austin Trout. I think he's actually a pretty good boxer. He's a very nice guy. I suspect that he's most likely to try to target Molina to try to get a 154-pound belt back. He certainly needs to get a couple of wins under his belt. He's the kind of guy who looks better against a guy who's going to come toward him. I think he'd struggle against a boxer and a mover. And he's also, because he's such a nice guy, he'd be a hard sell too, right? He's not going to get into any kind of pre-fight shenanigans with Floyd. The all-access would be kind of boring because he's just Austin. But if that were to happen, he's going to have to rebuild himself with a couple of very significant wins in 2014.
Timothy Bradley.
See, now I'd love that fight, but it just won't happen.
The Bob Arum problem.
Exactly, the Bob Arum / HBO versus Golden Boy / Showtime. I think that would be a great fight. I think Bradley would really, really struggle. I personally thought he lost to Pacquiao, but Bradley would bring it. I like to meet Bradley. He's not great at any one thing, but he's good at a whole bunch of them. He sells himself well. Again, the problem is he still doesn't seem to have much of a fan base, and a lot of people hate him unfairly for the fact that he was given the decision against Pacquiao. But an exciting fighter. He's got to get past Juan Manuel Marquez, of course, and we'll see if he can do that. If he gets past Marquez in a month, then he builds himself up into a real marquee fighter. But he's more likely, I suspect, to get the winner of Manny Pacquiao, Brandon Rios. That's the path for him.
Maybe this takes some of the heat off him now that C.J. Ross is the devil incarnate. I mean,
yeah.
#1 trending name on hashtag on Twitter yesterday.
Yeah, and it's become an entry in the Urban Dictionary now, isn't it? It's like, man, I really C.J. Ross that one. It's like, wow.
Yeah, but she defends the card,
which I think just goes to show that she probably shouldn't judge again, you know. Look, I'm often very defensive of judges because it is very hard. They see a fight differently than anybody else because they're not writing, they're not making notes, they're not commentating, they're not sitting on the couch drinking beer, they're not whooping, they're not hollering, they are sitting and just watching the fight, and they're not scoring a fight, they're scoring 12 individual fights. So I'm often very defensive of judges, particularly if, say, 3 judges together have very different cards than people watching them on TV. But when one judge consistently sees a fight differently from others, as she does, and she seems to really like scoring draws, then you've got competence issues. And the fact that she was given this big fight after the controversy of the last big fight is just unforgivable, and she certainly shouldn't be allowed to I mean, if she wants to judge some little tough man contest in Searchlight, Nevada, fine, but she shouldn't be allowed in the MGM Grand again, let alone actually allowed ringside to judge a fight.
Well, just for her own safety.
Exactly. Yeah.
Manny Pacquiao, you've already kind of talked about him. Let's move on, actually. Adrien Broner.
Now, this is, I think, purely hypothetically, the one big remaining potential super fight on Floyd's horizon. If Broner continues to build himself up the way that he has done. And one thing I'll say for myself, right, I've made some blunt-headed predictions over the years, including a few recently. But 3 years ago, I said Adrien Broner is the next great American boxing star. And he's proving that, both in and out of the ring. He's incredibly polarizing. He got so many boos at the weigh-in on Friday. But, you know, he, like Nassim Hamed, for example, before him, and Floyd to a certain extent, he won't care whether people are there to cheer for him or boo for him as long as they're there. Potentially, I think, with his skill set, if he stays with his attitude, he could be potentially, you know, the one big fight. And the reason why is that for them, and another reason why, is that if they were to fight, it would mean that their relationship, which is currently very close, Broner absolutely idolizes Floyd, and Floyd indulges and allows Broner to idolize him, it would mean that that relationship had fractured.
Oh, that could be a great storyline.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. That would be the only way that could happen. And I could see that relationship fracturing if Broner gets too big for his britches. I can absolutely see that happening. At the moment, not, because Floyd likes to have the little puppy dog following him around and dispensing advice and so on. But I could see that happening, and then that would be fascinating. That would be a really interesting contest.
Yeah, and that would put Floyd, I guess, in the babyface role.
Exactly. It would be the perfect thing. I was just saying to my editor last night at ESPN, I said, boy, you know what? If he were to fight and beat Adrien Broner, he'd be forgiven for everything. So, yeah, absolutely.
You may think the Broner fights, I think the Sergio Martinez fight, a potential huge fight and a potential loss for Floyd.
Again, absolutely, but again, I don't think about it because of the way things are. HBO have Martinez under contract. Sergio's going to do, I think, maybe 2 more fights. If Miguel Cotto wins in a few weeks, I suspect very strongly that Sergio will fight Cotto, and then maybe have 1 more farewell fight. It's a fight that I've been intrigued by, like yourself, for some time. Martinez is his body is breaking down to an extent that Floyd's isn't, and I'm not sure what he'll have left when he does come back. Again, unless something fundamental changes, unless Martinez sees out, if it's going to happen, it would probably have to be 2015, because I think HBO have Sergio for 2 more fights, which would be in 2004, the 2 fights in 2014. So he would have to decide to bolt HBO and, go to Showtime specifically to fight Floyd. But by then, he might not have very much left physically. But I agree with you stylistically, and in many ways it would be a tremendously difficult fight even for Floyd, because Sergio's so awkward and so difficult and doesn't do the things that conventional boxers should do, and is much harder to prepare for, and hits him like a mule as well. So
he has some great highlights. You could put together an incredible promotional clip for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Boxing politics means that it's extraordinarily unlikely to happen, but would be a terrific matchup, I think.
Here's the problem, though. You've got judges like C.J. Ross. You've got fights that aren't being made. And, of course, it's the $64 million question or whatever. Why can't boxing clean itself up, have a ranking structure? You must fight this next fighter. It would completely change the sport.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking yesterday, on my way back, I was watching I was just checking in on the scores of the Green Bay Packers-Washington Redskins game, and the Pack were all over the Redskins through 3 quarters, right? And I said to some friends, and some folks on Twitter and Facebook, well, okay, which beating is worse, Mayweather against Canelo or Packers against Redskins? And of course, everybody responds, well, C.J. Ross thinks the Redskins are tied. But yeah, exactly. Can you imagine in the NFL that say, for example, the Patriots and the Packers could never meet because the Patriots are in the AFC and the Packers are in the NFC, and when they do meet, one team clearly beats the other because you see them actually score the touchdowns, but the victory still goes to the other one.
But they're smart enough. They're businessmen. They understand it's bigger than any of this.
Precisely.
You give the people what they want,
Precisely.
which we rarely get in boxing.
That's right, and because it is so loosely, there are so many different governing bodies. That I think that's one of the key elements. There isn't one governing body. If we were able to do that, then we'd have a different situation. And also because it's very individually based, a guy can come along, somebody like Floyd Mayweather, and completely dictate terms in a way that other fighters can't do. But even other individual sports like tennis, where you have essentially 4 guys dominate tennis, but you still don't have Roger Federer avoiding Andy Murray, or Rafael Nadal and Novak Djokovic arguing over who's going to get the most money, even though they've both won the semi-finals in Wimbledon. Boxing, that element of it is a big factor, I think, in continuing to turn people off boxing, because even when you can persuade them to spend $75 for heaven's sake. No other sport asks people to do that. To spend $75 to watch the big thing, and they don't know. They must have heard that first card with C.J. Ross and thought, why do we bother watching boxing? What's going to happen next? And it does turn people off. The business of boxing turns people off. But it's so deeply rooted, it's very hard to address.
Well, let's address the undercard, the best fight of the night, Garcia and Matthysee. I picked Garcia to win this fight, just looking at the Zab-Judah fight as the fulcrum between the two. Your thoughts on the Garcia-Matthysee fight?
Well, as you said, it was the fight of the night. It was an absolutely terrific fight. I picked Matthysee to win. I picked him from the moment that this fight was made, because I just thought, on a styles make fights basis, that the 2 fights that Matthysee had struggled with were with guys who showed good footwork and movement, and not guys who would fight him. The one question that we had was, we know, because he does it all the time, that Danny Garcia can be in deep water and seemingly in trouble and find his way out of it, whereas Lucas Matthysee had never had to do that before. And that showed, I think. I thought Matthysee won the first half of the fight. His hand speed really impressed me. It was the first time I've been ringside, and I was impressed with how fast his hands were. He was really taking it to Danny Garcia. In the 4th round, Garcia adapted very well, but then I thought Matthysee regained the momentum. But once Garcia closed his eye, for about 3 rounds, Matthysee just fell apart, and Garcia absolutely turned it on and put a beating on him. And then, just as Matthysee turned that momentum around again, Garcia dropped him, and then had a strong 12th round. It was a very interesting fight of momentum, but I think what we really learned is this was the first time that Matthysee really had to deal with adversity. And by the time he'd adapted to that adversity, it was too late. Danny Garcia had seized control of the fight. Once again, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody, Danny Garcia was being underrated and overlooked going into this fight. And I actually think that even though they must get tired of it, that he and his father feed on being overlooked and underrated. It creates this. Angel Garcia was fuming, as well as he does, but he was fuming all week about the fact that Lucas Matthysee had been on the cover of Ring magazine and Danny hadn't. That really bothered him. And the fact that he was being overlooked really bothered him. And I think that just binds Angel and Danny closer together. Angel is the guy who is out there crazier than a box of crackers, but out there really defending his son to the hilt. And Danny loves that. You see him when Angel goes off on his rants, and Danny loves it. And I think the world against us thing really helps bring out the best in both of them. And you've got to, I give Garcia immense credit for dealing with that initial onslaught and adapting and responding and coming back. And he's done that now in several fights. He's done it against Zab Judah. He did it against Amir Khan. He's done it against Lucas Matthysee. He really deserves a lot of credit, actually, Danny Garcia.
Yeah, but neither fighter really loses.
Agreed.
Well, certainly Garcia doesn't, but Matthysee still comes off of this looking good because it was very exciting.
It was very exciting, and it was a close fight in the end, right? If he hadn't gotten knocked down in the 11th round, and that wasn't a huge knockdown, it was, trying to make up lost time. He walked into a punch and went down briefly. He might still have won that fight. It certainly might have been at worst a draw. It was still a very close fight, a good action fight. If Garcia doesn't fight Floyd in May, and he's, one guy we didn't talk about yet in that possibility, I wouldn't hate seeing that fight again. I really would not. I think they're two really evenly matched guys who gave us just a tremendous fight. That 12th round.
Yeah, it was scintillating stuff.
Unbelievable, wasn't it? Just fantastic.
Now, looking at some of the paydays here, I've got the Ring magazine's October issue. Floyd made $5 million for beating Zab Judah back in 2006. $10 million for Juan Manuel Marquez, 2009. $25 million for Victor Ortiz. $32 million for Guerrero. $42 million for Canelo. This bubble is getting bigger and bigger. How big does it get?
Boy, what was actually also funny? One point, one of my colleagues asked Floyd, what's going to be more to you, beating Canelo or pocketing $42 million? And he just smiled and he goes, I'm going to earn a lot more than $42 million. Because that was guaranteed. And this pay-per-view, I think, is going to do massive numbers. So, he's going to be doing more than fine. And Canelo, Canelo's going to have 10 million banknotes to dry his eyes with. So, he's got that going for him. I don't know that the rest of the pay-per-views, like we said, unless it's, say, a Broner fight, are going to be as close as this, close to earning this kind of money. Yeah, we'll see. I think it's got to peak around now, I think, because I just can't see there being another opponent who's going to drive as many potential pay-per-views. But at the same time, Floyd's the kind of guy who, he's not going to suddenly start taking less. He's in this to make as much money as possible. That actually, by the way, also points to Amir Khan as being, if he beats Devin Alexander, a very realistic opponent. And the reason for that is because then there's UK money to come into the pot too. And that's going to be a big factor. That even if the US money's going to
because he has the US market anyway. Why?
Exactly. To have that British money in the pot too. And he's very popular in the UK, Floyd.
Set up a Chris Eubank Jr. Mayweather fight.
Yeah, that's right.
Your podcast, honestly, one of the best on the internet. I've been listening to your show for years. Tell me about the show briefly, how the audience can get to listen to your program.
It's on iTunes. It is called the ESPN Heavy Hitting Boxing Podcast. It's generally every week. I miss some sometimes. Occasionally Brian Campbell will fill in for me. If you can't find it on iTunes or you miss it there, it is archived on the ESPN.com site. You can just, type in my name and there it is. So, it's generally a stream of consciousness, one person ranting into a microphone for 20 minutes or so, and sometimes even more. And we generally look back on the previous week's fights, look ahead to what's coming up, and really whatever else happens to be in mind. at that particular time. And I think, this current one will certainly look at C.J. Ross, question who on earth Floyd can fight next to earn as much money as he has, and consider a few other things around the sport.
Yeah, and if the audience wants to learn more about Kieran Mulvaney, they can check out KieranMulvaney.com, and none of it has anything to do with boxing.
Yeah, very little, exactly. Most of it is my other world. I live in a couple of really quite different worlds.
That's crazy, though, Kieran, because you're connected to the very top of boxing. You know, I know that you knew Burt Sugar, and
yeah.
It's just incredible that there's more to it than that. But.
Yeah. Well, for me, it all started off. It was just a lark. I'm a writer, a book author, and I wanted to have a change of pace, just very briefly from what I normally write. And so I went to Las Vegas to write a book about boxing, spent 8-9 months working on a really extensive proposal. It all went great. I loved it. My agent loved it. Lots of publishers thought it was great, and then said, boxing fans don't buy books. So I put all this effort in for nothing, but once you get sucked into boxing, it's very hard to get away from it. And
boxing fans don't buy books. Let me tell you, boxing fans, in my opinion, are some of the most intelligent sports fans out there.
I agree with you. The argument that they gave was they have so much material available in magazines and on the internet and so on and so forth that they just don't feel the need to buy books. And interestingly, it was the publishers who had most recently published boxing books, who of course we went to first because we thought, they publish books on boxing, who were the most adamant about it, because even very good boxing books had sold really poorly. So, well, there you go. Such is life. But I got a career out of it.
The last one I bought was Lennox Lewis's autobiography. So.
Oh, okay.
That's 10 years ago.
Well, there you go.
They're right. One last thing before I let you go, and thank you very much for being on the show. It's been great. There used to be a comic book called What If Comics, and it always had these scenarios. And it made me think of, what if Roberto Duran fought Floyd Mayweather?
I think you got two potential scenarios, right? And the two different Sugar Ray Leonard fights are the ones that provide those scenarios. You can absolutely see a situation where he just comes tearing out of the blocks. The Duran at his meanest. Let's say, and it also depends on what weight, of course. Duran at lightweight just fustigates him, I think. Just tears into him. Just is on him. He's got his head on his chest. He doesn't give him a chance to breathe. Floyd doesn't get a chance to get off any counters. He's just absolutely all over him and outworks him and leaves him lumped up and all kinds of a mess. The slightly slower Duran, the Duran at welterweight, the guy who fought Sugar Ray Leonard the second time, Floyd could embarrass him, dancing around. Duran's coming after him, trying to make it a war. Floyd's taunting him, pop, 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 moving around. Whatever struggles he had with Leonard in that second fight, I think could be magnified against a peak Floyd Mayweather like the guy we saw, because he wouldn't even engage him at all. He would taunt him, and then he wouldn't even be there for Duran to hit. It wouldn't be a case of tying him up and outboxing him and flurrying him and throwing a bolo punch. He'd pop him a couple of times and then be on the other side of the ring before Duran could throw a punch. So I think it really depends. And I know that's blasphemy to a lot of people, but I can absolutely see at welterweight, I would probably favor Floyd Mayweather over Roberto Duran. At lightweight, when Duran was just a beast, I would pick Duran.
Kieran Mulvaney, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thanks so much for asking me. I really appreciate it.